instilling a culture of security. Security awareness is perhaps one of the single most important things that one can do to mitigate the biggest threat vector in organizations, and that's people.
Welcome to the Ocean of Technology podcast,
where we bring on real experts to talk about
real technology, real deep.
I'm Nate Samuels.
And I'm Joshua Williams.
And we're your hosts.
Before we get started, I just want you guys to all kind of, give an introduction of who you are.
Okay. We'll start with Josh Copeland.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead, Josh.
Josh Copeland. I am one of the security directors for AT&T. My role is essentially that of a VCISO for our external customers, state, local government, higher ed, lower ed, so on and so forth. 25 plus years in IT, first 20 of that being United States Air Force, doing everything you possibly imagine on the IT cybersecurity before jumping into Fed contracting, doing cloud platform security. Now I ran a SOC for 2 years with AT&T, and now I'm doing kind of this VCISO thing. So that's my background. And obviously I am the unpopular opinion guy on LinkedIn.
All right, Sean.
Okay. Sean Wright, Universal Music Group. I head up both information and physical security. I've been in security for well over 20 years. Early in my career, back in the 90s, did a lot of work in the military, on military bases, submarines, that kind of thing. So that was pretty cool. And then on the, just so everybody's aware, on the physical security side, it's not your traditional information security domains within physical security. It's the extent of, armed motorcades in Nigeria or kidnap and ransom, extraction, intelligence, employee protection, all of that kind of stuff. So facility security, all across the board. So it's a kind of a unique role.
All right, Richard, we're ready.
Yeah, so I'm Rich Davis, and like my colleagues here on the podcast, I have about 25 years of experience in IT. I was a U.S. Army airborne combat medic and communications specialist for a number of years before I ended up leaving the military, going to IBM, working with mainframes, IBM 4381s, ES 9000s, 3090s, the big heavy metal machines. I quit IBM, went to law school, became a lawyer, and still maintained that technical acumen and combined the understanding of the law with technology and became a e-discovery practitioner. And I ran litigation technology groups for a couple of major firms in Manhattan, Cravath, Swaine and Moore being one of them, which has represented IBM for perhaps the last 50 years or so. From there, I went on to do some entrepreneurial things. I set up a company with a couple of guys to do e-discovery work for large companies. I've consulted around the world for banks in the UK, technology companies in Asia, on-site training folks in US legal data management practices. I eventually took a role with a major pharmaceutical company where I ran the cyber threat intelligence group, as well as the incident response group, the data loss prevention group, the threat defense operations group, and the digital did I say digital forensics already? So there were 5 groups in total as part of a cyber fusion center model. And so we had, the global security team, lots of ex-FBI guys who ran that organization, and we liaised very closely on the cyber side. Today, I'm the CISO of a startup that is using some very, very novel DLT, distributed ledger technology approaches to data management. We have an architecture that's patented, and we have achieved transaction rates that are fairly significant, and that allows us to go ahead and do some things. And we're in a capital raise mode at the moment. So my days are pretty busy and pretty long.
Always when you're joining, these startups or newer companies, there's always going to be long days, many hats.
Yeah, and hopefully nice valuations in the end, right?
Exactly.
That's the goal.
That is the goal.
So I think this is so interesting because, I can go on LinkedIn, I can read a little bit about you guys and get a little bit about what you guys do, and I knew all of you guys were around the same, I guess, length of experience in the industry, but the depth comes from some of your particular experiences. And so to have three people with three different sets of experience and seem to have all come out of some sort of government, it's really interesting to see. So I think I brought a really great group here together, and I'm excited to hear what ideas you throw around. So we're going to start with some kind of rudimentary-ish questions just for our viewers who maybe don't have the context of why we're doing this podcast. So we'll start with Josh. Josh, what is a legacy system? Who has them, and why are they at such a higher risk?
So I think the easiest way to think of a legacy system is anything that is not currently supported by whatever vendor that produces it. So if you're running Windows XP, or if you're using a, Linux Red Hat version 4, those are going to be legacy systems. Things that don't have support anymore. So you have abandonware that, I have some niche product that I used forever ago that I haven't found a replacement for. So that's kind of the broad picture of what we have for legacy software. And who has it? Pretty much everyone. Somebody's got something hidden somewhere in the back closet that is end of life, running something that's old, or they can't get rid of it because they have a dependency on something else. I use Java as a great example, where you have tons of applications that have to use a very specific version of Java that might be, 5-6 years old or more. I've seen it worse, where that software is so old, outdated, not supported, highly vulnerable. And what makes these things really particularly nasty is they tend to be vulnerable, and because they're legacy systems, they're often forgot about. And particularly in the OT environment, a lot of times they were never patched in the first place. So you have systems that are running, water treatment plants that are running on a Windows Server 2000 implementation that's been rebooted once in the last 23 years. Things actually exist.
So true.
All right. So Richard, I'm gonna jump to you for the next question. So, okay, Richard, can you explain an example of, actually, Sean, this is for you. Sorry, complete switch. We'll cut this out because I think Sean's gonna have a little more interesting of some stories on the physical side. Can you explain an example where your job was to assess vulnerabilities in a legacy system or a legacy process in your case?
I mean, to be honest, I mean, to Joshua's point, I mean, we already know they're vulnerable. So the recognition of trying to pen test those or trying to determine whether or not there's vulnerabilities is kind of I wouldn't say useless, but we pretty much already know that there's a problem there. So really the solution is more around the how do we mitigate the risk of those systems being impacted to begin with. So it's not really typically like those systems we don't really have in our vulnerability management scanning. Matter of fact, in some cases, if you start scanning those systems, you can actually take them down, which you don't really want to do. So they are, for the most part, just sort of isolated to a large degree. And we just make sure there's adequate monitoring around the systems. If we can harden them, we will do that and make them very singular functional types of machines. And then we'll implement, microsegmentation around those machines to isolate them even further.
Perfect. And then follow on to that, I guess the next follow-up question is the incident response plan. When you do have a problem, what is an incident response playbook, and how is it sort of developed within an organization?
So you're asking what is an incident response playbook, or how do we build an incident response playbook?
Yeah. How do we build one?
Yeah.
From a very general.
Yeah, typically incident response playbook, if you will, is really an exercise that we go through to determine what we do if that system is unavailable. In the terms of an isolated legacy system, I mean, if that thing goes down, there's probably business process that's going to be impacted. And in some cases, maybe there's some real like critical functions that may be impacted, like payroll, for example. So we want to make sure we have secondary, services available, ready to go if something should happen. So in the case of, what does a runbook look like specifically for a legacy system? You would definitely have some sort of, pre-planned exercise to run through, what happens if the system goes offline, and then have your contingency plans baked into the runbook to go on and try to continue business with whatever service it is that you end up using to facilitate whatever that legacy system was doing in the first place.
Awesome. And I guess, how that kind of plays into it is that we're seeing a lot more automation these days. So Richard, how do you kind of see automation playing a role in upgrading legacy systems, if at all?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it goes back to what you define as a legacy system. I think the definition that was provided by Joshua earlier is definitely spot on. In a lot of the audit work that I do, I audit acquisitions that companies, that a specific company does. They acquire about 15 to 20 companies a year, and any company that doesn't conform to the standards, we consider that to be a legacy system, notwithstanding the fact they may have certain capabilities and controls that are up to date. That having been said, the automation part of getting a legacy system sort of up to speed, or dealing with issues that could arise that in that legacy system, is really a capability that exists in a lot of EDR, XDR controls today. One of the things that we want to be able to do is to ensure that certain baseline requirements are met to be able to bring or to implement automation. As was mentioned earlier by Sean, you touch some of these systems and they will break. I've worked in environments where you have very sensitive instruments that are connected to these legacy systems. And if these instruments go offline, there's a significant operational and business impact to the organization. So the idea that you can automate remediation or bringing these systems up to speed is pretty challenging because of the variation that you'll find in legacy environments. That having been said, some of the controls, some of the security controls that exist today, if we're talking purely security versus operational capability or some combination thereof, if we're talking more about security, a lot of the XDR tools that exist today can be implemented on those systems to bring to align them with the standards that the organization needs to have. That being said, there are various gradations of automation that one can implement around legacy systems.
I love that you guys all kind of ran us through basically the depth regarding legacy systems, the incident response, right? You threw out a couple different terminologies out there. Maybe some of our viewers may or may not know, such as EDR. If you would want to kind of break that down, endpoint, I'll let you say it, of course, right?
Sure. So, endpoint detection and response, we started out in the early days with just plain old antivirus or anti-malware capabilities. A lot of these tools today have a more significant intelligence aggregation capability, where cyber threat intel informs the threat sort of vectors that are being monitored by the tools that are on endpoints, right? It's not that as though they download virus definitions, which is the thing that was, done in the past. There are real-time behavioral indicators that are being streamed into central command and control servers for these endpoint detection and response capabilities. So I remember talking with some FBI colleagues about crowdsourcing intelligence, which informs security. So using some of these EDR tools today, some of the more mature ones, we have the benefit of the correlation of threat indicators that will allow for these tools to automate a response, even though they may not have a specific piece of or a specific definition that's local to that machine. They're actually pulling telemetry from various sources across the country, across the globe, in fact. And based on that correlation of that telemetry, they are able to identify anomalous behaviors in an automated endpoint detection and response fashion. So that's what EDR is really all about.
That was a great explanation. Wow. That's awesome. Okay. So let's start getting into the open conversation. This is kind of where, you guys should pass ideas around some of the challenges that you guys have faced and, get deep into it. So you got an organization that's transferring from 19, God knows when, to 2023 for XYZ. Let's call it payroll software. They're moving somewhere to somewhere else. How would you kind of get into the conversation? And then how do you kind of pitch your concerns to make sure that they're handled?
Well, I mean, my job is to help the business understand what their risk is, and then, make sure that they are doing something about their risk. So in that case of a new payroll system or migrating a payroll system, I care less about the technology. The operation itself is supporting the business in some way. My job as a security practitioner is to figure out what the risk is by doing so, and then helping them figure out what they want to do about their risk, if there is risk that's identified in what it is that they're doing. So at some point, someone's going to have to make a decision, usually the business owner, whether or not they want to deal with that risk or not. Typically they do, especially if it's a financial system or something like that. And then we will work with them to figure out what they want to do. But as far as like the actual technology itself, honestly, like I could care less what they use. We just want to make sure whatever it is that they do decide to use, it's secure in some way and minimizes whatever risk it is that we're identifying from whatever that thing is that they're implementing.
So to piggyback off of Sean, it really comes down to taking a really risk management based approach and really showing them from a business perspective, this is all the risk that you're accepting with your legacy system. Here is this risk that you are accepting with this new system and what the delta between those two things are. Ideally, if you're moving to a new system, that list of risks should be greatly reduced and have a different set of risk associated with it. So I'm moving to a SaaS-based product. I'm not relying on this old technology that's in-house, it's not being upgraded, but now I've introduced risk of, is this redundant? Is it going to be affected when AWS gets attacked and half the internet goes down? Is that a risk that I'm willing to accept versus the risk of having this old exploitable software sitting on a 10-year-old server in my rack room? So you really have to take those risks and apply them to the business case. As practitioners, we understand bits and bytes, and we can talk, CSV or CVSS scores all day long. Right. But to a business person, that doesn't matter. I have to translate that to dollars and cents.
Exactly. Lots of, consonants and vowels, don't mean a whole hell of a lot to the business. But it's important to, as indicated by both Sean and Joshua, articulate the risk in a way that the business person understands. It's also important, critically important, to understand the risk tolerance of the organization. My sort of strategy is also involves making sure that the business stakeholder understands their fiduciary duty to the organization to take action. I'm very fond of saying awareness creates a duty to act. And once you've sufficiently articulated, what the risk of a particular deficiency is, there's a duty to act. And that action could be to accept the risk, to transfer the risk, to mitigate the risk. by doing X, Y, and Z. And it's really important to articulate, what the impact is, to the organization in terms of reputational harm, et cetera, et cetera. What's also helpful is to leverage tools like, BitSight and Security Scorecard, right? If the risk is with a legacy system that's an externally facing asset, tools like BitSight and Security Scorecard can give you a very objective, quantifiable risk score that can be used by insurers to impact your cyber liability insurance. So depending on where the system sits in the organization, whether it's, behind the firewall, if it's externally facing, and a lot of externally facing assets are, being presented to the internet. And so if the risk lies there and it's visible to the world, it can impact your ability to get the best cyber liability insurance rates. So there's a combination of things that you can do to get stakeholders to pay attention to what you have to say as a security practitioner and not look at you as though you're some propeller head, adding friction to the process.
And in terms of that, do you guys kind of see a struggle with that happening recently? The reason why I'm asking this is within cybersecurity right now, there's not much of a change in growth for companies looking for security professionals or to get these initiatives onboarded comparatively with, data and cloud, which is being obviously at the forefront of everyone's minds currently. And even though that this is at the forefront of everyone's mind, obviously, cybersecurity is going to be playing a big role in this moving forward as well. It's not a dying market, it's a growing market. So what do you guys see those issues with trying to push these initiatives currently or no?
Not really. I mean, as long as it makes business sense, I guess, you've got to tie it, when we go and we start developing our strategy, one of the things that we do as practitioners is we have to understand from the business what's important to them so that when we develop our strategy, we're actually tying those back to things that actually matter. Mm-hmm. So when we go and we say, okay, CEO, your number one concern was, raising security awareness within the organization. In order for us to mature in this area, we need to invest in, some sort of a product that people can report phishing. We need to do phishing campaigns to make our employees more aware, and it's going to cost $300,000. So we tie it back to what's important again to the CEO, and that's all part of that's how we drive our strategies. I mean, we don't just create something in a vacuum. I mean, we do our things, and there's probably a lot that we do that the CEO may not know about because they're just daily sort of deals that we have to figure out. But in general, when we are trying to build out a security organization, we have to tie our strategy back to those important aspects of the business, or else we won't go anywhere. I mean, it just won't. We'll go say, hey, we need this, and they'll be, what are you talking about? I don't care about that. I care about this thing over here. So it's important to understand what those executives are looking for and what's important to them and what they're concerned about, so you can then tie those initiatives back to something that's meaningful. So I don't typically have a problem getting budget or really have a problem with justifying the things that I'm trying to do, because it's always being tied back to something that is relevant and meaningful to the people that I'm actually talking to about security that are driving the budget.
Yeah, to Sean's point and Richard's point, as security practitioners, when we tie back to their executive duties, they have that fiduciary duty, they have that awareness. As soon as I've raised the flag that this is a problem, now they have a obligation to their shareholders, to the SEC, to their customer base, and that comes back to compliance regulations that they might be under because they're a publicly traded company or they're dealing with a particular type of technology. Those things come back and go, this is where your dollars and cents are. This is where, if you don't do this and you choose to accept this risk, here are the negative consequences of doing that. One of the other things you can actually do is potentially spin these security initiatives into money generating events. If you look at it and go, well, I want to look at potentially moving into federal contracting space, there are expenses that you have to pay up front to be able to work in that space. You need to do, CMMC or get FedRAMP certified to have your product there. Those are costly things and they force security on you, but then it makes your product more marketable because you've opened the aperture of who you can sell to, and in turn also raise your price because you're now a verified, more secure product.
Oh, great points. Absolutely great points. I think, the amalgam of the suggestions that come out of, the experience that, Sean and Joshua and I have, it's really shows that the perspectives around fiduciary duty, risk management, tying back to the business, tying value back to the business, being able to articulate value of what you're doing, in a clear way, and then amortizing that value. And I think, Joshua, you're kind of, you hinted at that by saying, here's something that is a cost, driven by a cost center that, well, not driven, but mandated by regulations, let's say, and it's mainly a cost. How do you then take that cost and amortize it in a way that creates value? So I think all of these things are things that we need to be able to do as practitioners.
So, question that was not on the sheet, but something that I'm curious about is, you have several vendors who provide all sorts of different services and everything within an organization. When you upgrade a software or you upgrade a system within a company, typically now you have to either extend your policies to cover that, or you have to get a new vendor potentially to cover whatever that IT asset is, or anything like that. What does that conversation kind of go like?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Sorry.
Okay. Sure. So example is, like, you were talking about cybersecurity insurance policies, and how that may change as you upgrade a system, right? So that may be one, or maybe you have an endpoint, you have an EDR provider, and previously you had something that was completely on-prem. All the stuff was on-prem. Now it's going to the cloud. That's now coming back to you and has an open-facing application. So now you have to extend that vendor, or you have to find a new vendor to back that up. Like, how does that sort of conversation go? Is that a conversation that starts at the beginning of the strategy when they're thinking about upgrading? Or is that a thing at the end that you say, hey, do we tack this on, or what are we doing, guys?
That's the worst time to do it, is at the end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It ends up costing the company more money, actually. So yeah, right up front, you want to like, I'm not part of IT. IT is not, we're our own entity. So they know that if they're going to be doing something, leveraging some sort of technology to enable the business, they need to bring us in, because we need to be a part of that process up front to help them figure out, like, okay, this is the thing you're going to use. This is how you need to build it from a security perspective. If it's something that's, a new off-the-shelf product, we have to evaluate it to make sure that it meets our, minimum security baselines, and it's has security worthiness and all that kind of good stuff. And the vendor is, a good vendor, and just vetting it through our own internal security assessment process. We have to do that, up front.
Yeah, to Sean's point, security will drive higher upfront costs. However, if you do not take security into account upfront, it will cost you even more to put security in on the back end, and trying to piece together a non-fitting strategy where you're going to bolt this piece on and bolt this piece on, rather than buy the right product with the right security baked in from the beginning. And then when you start looking at kind of second and third order effects, cyber security insurance policies, the right tool sets bring your policy cost down. The wrong tool sets drive that cost back up. So you need to take kind of that big holistic view of, where are all my widgets? What if I move the dial here? Where does the dial move over here? So maybe I do put this product that costs a little bit more, but I'm actually getting that money back on the back end because it's reducing my cybersecurity insurance and it's reducing my risk over here. And therefore, this gives me a bit more cost effection here.
Interesting point. When you're looking at, the cost on the upfront comparatively with the cost on the back end that you may be saving, or is that your job as well? Or, because I know Sean was saying it's more of the IT professionals, but I know you're saying, you also look at these cost saving ways or cost management ways. is that your job, and is that how you also pitch it, or is that a little bit outside of your guys' field?
I think it depends largely on what your role is in the organization and how your organization's set up and where your reporting structure is. Sometimes a CISO reports to a CIO, sometimes they report to a CFO, sometimes they report to the CEO. What is that kind of management executive look like? But ultimately, everyone wants the same thing. They want the best product for the best price that gives them the best return on investment. And putting in that perspective makes it easier to sell to everybody in the room.
Yeah, I think there's accountability throughout the reporting chain, right? The responsibility for, the bottom line responsibility may be, at the CFO level or, at the executive director level. Or at a VP level, who knows? I mean, but at the end of the day, there is, responsibility and accountability for making the right decisions. It's critically important to be able to do that. And as it relates to, implementing technologies that will facilitate better security, look at what's going on with CISA recommendations today, right? The big thing is post-quantum computing readiness, where CISA is, asking companies to look at, the tools and capabilities that they have from an encryption algorithm perspective. I mean, that's a huge initiative that many companies are starting to ramp up on. And those companies that don't have that QR, I'm just making that up. I don't even know if QR is a seal, like a good housekeeping seal, but I'm confident that in the very near future, we're going to start seeing that on products. We're going to start seeing quantum ready, quantum encryption ready and things of that nature. Those technologies will cost a little bit more upfront, but to the point that Joshua was making and Sean was making, it's important to understand the implications of the technologies that you are bringing into the organization in terms of the impact that they're going to have because of what's happening in the evolving threat and regulatory landscape. I think it's critically important to do that.
Yeah, and I'm not going to justify why we need something based on how much cost it's going to reduce either. I'm not in that business at all. I am not looking at return on investment. I'm looking at, if we do this, how much risk can we reduce? It's a risk reduction exercise, and I compare what we're doing to risk, not necessarily how much we're gonna save. Because as soon as I get into those conversations, the question is, well, can we reduce headcount? Can we reduce? Because these are tangible things. What can we take out of the environment, whether it be their people headcount or servers, hardware, whatever it might be. And I do not want to get into that conversation at all. It's not worth it.
Sounds like you're coming from experience over
there. Yeah. Early, I learned that like 20-something years ago.
Oh man.
So this brings up a really good point, and this ties into my last question. And Josh brought it up on our last podcast that we had with him. Knowledge transfer about your IT infrastructure. So example, Equifax back in, I think 2014 or whatever, they had an endpoint that nobody knew about. Essentially, it wasn't under the IT inventory, and so then this thing just pops up, and now they realize 6 months later, oh man, there's a breach, and we lost a ridiculous amount of records. From a knowledge transfer standpoint, like, how do you ensure that legacy technology doesn't get under the radar, doesn't get forgotten about? Like, it sounds so simple, so dumb, but I mean, it happens,
I want to share an experience, right? In 2010, a major oil company had a rig in the Gulf of Mexico, and that rig caught fire. Tragically, several people lost their lives and collapsed into the Gulf. I was a consultant with that energy company prior to the actual incident, doing some analysis work in the CIO's office. And one of the things that I did subsequent to that incident, and I happened to be on site, was try to determine where certain rig-related assets were. And I recall having a conversation with one of the teams that were involved in the exploration and production functions. And he brought me into a room, and it was a conference room. At least it started as a conference room, and it became a server room. And nobody had any idea that there were those servers there. Nobody had any idea about this whole shadow IT operation. And the assets were not part of any CMDB. So it's incredibly challenging at times to engage in that knowledge transfer if there isn't a formal way, a formal process of provisioning, acquiring, requesting, and tracking assets. It's if you don't have that level of rigor and formality, and you don't have a CMDB that is kept current, you will never be able to engage in proper knowledge transfer in a consistent way. That's my take.
Yeah, and kind of going off of what Richard's talking about, true IT assets, are fairly easy to find and discover. We have lots of great tools that will do that. You can use Tenable, you can use Qualys. There are tons of network discovery tools out there. Where you really run the problem with shadow IT and all these legacy systems you don't know about is on the OT side of the network, where you are extremely hesitant to run those traditional IT tools because PLCs and traffic lights and machinery don't like to be scanned. They see all this stuff come at them and they fail safe. And fail safe could mean a number of different things. It could be a traffic light going into four-way stop. It could be machine stopping production in the middle of your workday. It could be a PLC stopping water treatment for an entire city. And those are risk adverse decisions that people don't really want to make and say, scanning the network and this occurring is an acceptable risk. For 99.9% of the people, that is not an acceptable risk. So that's where you have all these niches of hidden pockets of IT and shadow IT and legacy systems that nobody really knows about except for the one guy who uses that thing once a month.
And I know we're a little bit over on time, but this is really, really interesting because I haven't heard the term shadow IT, but I mean, you brought it up. So if you guys have any experience in that, Richard shared a story, but anyone else, jump in because that's so interesting is random things off the grid. Like what, how do you even go about that? The guy who worked there 30 years ago is the last guy who has the whole script A to Z. And now how do you got to find someone who's also got similar experience and come in and map your thing. Like, what do you even do?
You go literally business unit by business unit, and you conduct interviews with stakeholders within each one of those. So like at Universal Music, we have offices in 70 plus countries. We really had to go to each and every one of those countries to figure out what they were doing within those labels. And sure enough, Paul went to Poland. Poland's like, yeah, we've got this, switch over here and this server over here, and this guy named Tomek that manages it all. And we're like, who's Tomek? He wasn't even like an employee or anything. So yeah, you have to get into the business and you have to build the relationship with the business. And that takes time. That takes time. Even if you have a centralized, and again, I'm not part of IT, but even if you have a centralized IT group, you're still going to have pockets and, little nooks and crannies and stuff that you're not aware of. Shoot, an employee could stick a IoT device somewhere, and it's, connected wirelessly to the network on the guest network or something like that. And, then all of a sudden you might have a problem. So it's literally like going out to the business for us anyway, has been going about, and even when I was with Disney, it was the same way, going around to the businesses and figuring out what they're doing, getting to know who is kind of the decision makers in those different businesses, and then just developing a relationship with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On that, you kind of hit at, well, how does shadow IT come into existence? And one of the fastest, easiest ways for shadow IT to come into existence in your organization is make the tools they're supposed to use hard to use. Because humans are ingenious. They will find a way around the tool that you want them to use. If it is laborious, if it causes consternation, if it's too hard to use or too long to use, they're going to go, well, I'm supposed to use, this encryption product, I'm supposed to use Voltage to send my encrypted files to my customer, but I totally have access to Gmail and, Google Drive. I'll just drop it there because that's super easy. If I don't have controls in place that prevent that from occurring, and I don't have policy that says, ye verily, you will not, and then have the technology that stops you from doing that, and the tool I gave you to do your job is hard, they're going to find another way.
Yeah. Business process optimization is critical to preventing shadow IT. People will act in the fashion that's most expedient for them to do what it is they need to be able to do. And if there's friction that's created by IT, friction that's created by security, friction to their process, they will find a way to circumvent it, no matter what administrative controls you have or technical controls.
And I guess that's my concern in terms of like strategy around upgrade, is that people just say, okay, we're going to do this now. And maybe there's no governance or no structure, no control around it. Oh, let's just upgrade to this project management software. And nobody gets told about it. And then it's like, why are, people's PII going into this software that 6 guys from Home Depot have? Like that's, and so I guess, that's where that piece of talk to your stakeholders, make friends with everybody in the company, hear what other people are doing, in case you do get wind of, oh, they're doing this. Okay, let me try and ask some more questions, that's really interesting. And it's interesting because it's a manual but relationship building job. And that if there is a switch in talent, or if one of you guys decided, oh, let me just jump to another company, there's a potential the hit by a bus scenario where it's like, he's the only guy who knew all those 6 guys, and that happened, and now he's gone, So I guess, like, not to keep you guys overtime, but within an organization, how do you control that? Those little minutia, those relationships, those little documentations. How do you keep track of, like, oh, Joe runs this thing in Poland? Like, is it impossible? Is it a never-ending chase?
It's just an awareness thing. Honestly, like, I don't know. When I first arrived at Universal Music 10 years ago, I mean, no one knew who'd even contact in security for anything. So as we went around, we started developing those relationships. People business more and more came to us for anything and everything related to security. And to be honest, they want to be good stewards at the end of the day. They don't want to lose their job. So they're and they for the most part want to do the right thing. And if they have someone there that is the subject matter expert for security, they'd much rather talk to you versus just go ahead and just like doing something that they don't know if they're putting the company at risk or not. Maybe they do know and they just don't know what else to do. But it's really just the awareness, making sure that the company knows that you exist. And that means that you have to have a security organization that is kind of externally facing, not internally facing, and just kind of get out there and, make sure that everybody knows that you're there to help. To be honest, I mean, that's the right approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Security has the reputation of being the purveyor of the word no to everything. And as soon as you get past the stigma of being the person that says no to everything, and you become the person that says yes, if, or yes, but, and you frame it in you want to do this thing. Okay, I want you to be able to do that thing because it increases your productivity, does your business function. And here's the best way to do it in the secure fashion, which we are mandated by our compliance regulations, by our corporate governance, by our whatever our mandate is, in a way that gets them what they need and does so in a secure manner. They're going to, as Sean said, come to you, because nobody likes to be the person that gets their hand caught in the cookie jar, because that is a career-making mistake. If you're the person who brought in some shadow IT and didn't run it through the right people, and something bad happens, you're probably the guy falling on your sword for that one. Now, if you
But a
want
lot of times I feel like the CISOs take that heat.
No, they don't. I mean, unless they say no.
Yeah.
And if they say no, then that problem becomes theirs.
Yeah.
Got it. It's interesting.
That's why I don't say no.
I feel like, so when I'm on, so I was mentoring a group for the ISACA case study for this year. And a lot of times they like to go, oh, it's that guy's fault, or, oh, it's that guy's fault. And I think that, you know, just generally the way the news kind of portrays something, it goes, oh, it's that company's fault. The CEO should be more over this, or the CISO should be more over this. But pointing fingers and blaming somebody, that's not always the answer. You know, it's everyone's responsibility. Security is everyone's responsibility.
That's right.
And that's really what you guys are saying here.
That's right.
So, all right. Well, love to wrap this up. If you guys have any additional comments, this is the time. Any last things to say? We'll start with Sean, go down.
No, just thank you. And yeah, Richard, Josh C, Josh W, Nate, great meeting you guys. Hopefully our paths will cross in the near future, hopefully.
I echo those sentiments. You know, it was really fun to hang out with you, Sean, and Josh C, and Nate. Thank you for the invitation, and Josh W. It was great to connect with you, and you know, I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah. I can't say much more than my colleagues, Richard and Sean. It was great being here, great sharing some experience with some, you know, other folks who have been down the trenches for as long as I have, and then sharing some new perspectives with some folks who are more new to the battle that we've been fighting for the last 25 years or so.
Thanks for listening in to the Ocean of Technology podcast.
We post every Tuesday, so set your automations and hit that bell button.
Do you need a life jacket?
We have an extensive bench of onshore professionals ready to take your projects to the next level.
Because we solve problems.
Not just fill roles.
We are Ocean.